Who's next? Oh, the Honourable Member for Tabakit, Minister of Works and Infrastructure.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to contribute to this debate on the motion that is before this Honourable House. A motion that is mischievous, to say in the least, and whose sole intention is a very flagrant attempt to denigrate the good name, character, and integrity, as well as the professional conduct of the current Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one may go even further to say that this motion is an attempt, or it appears to be a well-planned and orchestrated conspiracy to attack not just the Minister of Finance, but the People's Partnership Government.
On a point of order, 48-6, imputing improper motives on the pilot of the motion, the conspiracy, all kind of things.
Member, I would ask you, I would yeah, please. Member, I would urge you as you proceed. I will guide you as you go along if you are going off course. But your language, based on what has been said in terms of the conspiracy question, I know that you are capable of more elegant language, so I will ask you to be very mindful of imputing any motives that could be misinterpreted by this Honourable House. Continue, Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm so guided, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, but the motion does come at a time in the history of this Parliament and at a time in the history of this country when the People's Partnership Government is in the ascendancy. And, of course, there will be attempts to begin to derail the success of this government by attacking the good name and character of the persons on this side. And today it's the Minister of Finance. Yesterday it was the Prime Minister. Another day it would be the Minister of Justice and so on. And you would expect to see these kinds of attacks coming in a fury. But Mr. Speaker, I hope my words frivolous, vexatious, and totally without merit is acceptable, because those are the famous words of the member for Diego Martin Northeast. And it is a frivolous motion, a personal attack on a citizen who is respected for his integrity. And therefore, it's a motion that we take seriously from the point of view that we intend to stand up and defend the good name of the Minister of Finance, unlike our friends on the other side, who, when they are faced with motions of no confidence, they run. They run out of the house. And they are afraid to defend themselves because perhaps they don't have the platform to defend themselves. They don't have the kind of defense in itself that they can rely upon, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the interesting things that happened here this afternoon, which I like to refer to, is the behavior of the member for Diego Martin Northeast as he presented, Mr. Speaker. And we saw, Mr. Speaker, his complete refusal to allow the Honourable Minister of Finance even to stand up on a point of clarification, Mr. Speaker. And I thought that was an abuse of power. I thought it was a reflection of a deep arrogance and disrespect by the member for Diego Martin Northeast. Yes. But Mr. Speaker, what was even more telling to me, and I'm sure to those who are viewing this parliamentary debate, was that even when you stood up to speak, the member was shouting at you, Mr. Speaker. And I thought that is a disrespect for the chair. And Mr. Speaker...
Mr. Speaker, point of order, standing order 48.6, standing order 48.4. What happened?
Well, I think, I know you are not the subject, but I think the member is responding to some of your contributions. But I think what the honourable member, I would like to advise that in responding to the contributions of members on the other side, we must take into account that the motion is not about those members who have spoken. It is about the Minister of Finance and the economy. So we wouldn't like any member who is contributing to bring other members into this debate unless you are just making references a passant, but without imputing improper motives or bringing those members into the debate in any way or the other. Continue, honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But you see, what is very obvious, Mr. Speaker, is that some people like to criticize the behavior of others, but they themselves do not like to stand the scrutiny of their own behavior and their own conduct. And you want to stand up again on a point of order. You will stand up a million times this afternoon. But the fact is that your behavior was unacceptable.
Mr. Speaker, standing order 48.6, this motion is not about me.
Again, I will ask members again not to personalize any debate. If the member was in a state of misbehavior, I am the person to take responsibility for putting up the member in question. But when we are contributing, do not get personalized, do not personalize the debate, focus on the issues before us. I would ask members to be guided accordingly. Continue, honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, I'm so guided. I wouldn't go back there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that when the opposition leader spoke this afternoon, he thought he was presenting a good case, a strong case, until the response came from the Minister of Finance. And his entire case fell flat. His entire case was, as it were, dismissed by the Minister of Finance. And the Minister of Finance successfully disputed all the accusations of the leader of the opposition and as well the member for Diego Martin Northeast. Because they both based their case upon what is purported to be a fraudulent document. They have not proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that this document by Henry Ford exists. And in fact, the minister, in his response, made it very clear from a letter that was penned to the Chief Executive Officer, Trinidad and Tobago Securities and Exchange Commission.
Standing order 44.8. I am being misquoted. I would like the opportunity to clarify in due course.
Continue, Honourable Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. In paragraph 5 of this letter, that is penned by B.L.V. Gale, QC LLB Honours, Barrister Attorney at Law, Trident Financial Centre in Hastings, Christchurch. I want to read into the records a paragraph of this letter because it's important that it's repeated. Because they base their argument and they base their case on what is a document that was unsigned, Mr. Speaker. And while you said they could use every document, Mr. Speaker, it is necessary for us to also say that that document is a fiction, Mr. Speaker. And I quote, that Sir Henry, and the lawyer is writing on behalf of Sir Henry, that Sir Henry has carried out a search of his records including his computer system, and at this time could find no record of either the draft opinion referred to above or indeed to a letter dated 28 March 2007, which according to the draft opinion had been written to him by Ms. Joanne Descent on behalf of the Securities Commission, seeking his opinion relative to the strength of cases and the formulation of charges against some of the persons identified in the report. Mr. Speaker, we couldn't be more clear that Sir Henry has carried out a search of his records, including his computer system, and could find no record, Mr. Speaker. And that is the document upon which they based their case, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, in the context of what the member for Diego Martin Northeast was waving in the Parliament that he had from the Trinidad and Tobago Securities and Exchange Commission. That's right. He omitted to read all of what the document. And Mr. Speaker, I will now read what is also in the document, which I think is very important to this. And I read, Mr. Speaker, signed by Osborne Nurse, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Trinidad and Tobago Securities and Exchange Commission, Thursday, 20th November 2008, and I'm saying that, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that it's the same document we are referring to. And in this document it says, and I read, Mr. Speaker, Council therefore advised, and this is what the member for Diego Martin Northeast deliberately didn't read, advised that the probability of success in prosecuting these matters, either at an administrative or criminal level, was extremely low. And then comes the decision. The Commission has considered the advice of senior counsel and has decided to take no further action in the matter. No further action in the matter, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, no further action. No further action in the matter. Whether it's family matters or what, the Commission decided to take no further action in the matter. Why didn't you read that? If the member for Diego Martin Northeast was trying to establish something in the eyes of the population, then I'm trying to establish what is the truth. And the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and that is that the Commission has considered the advice of senior counsel and has decided to take no further action in the matter. Mr. Speaker, so they relied on a document which Mr. Henry Ford says he knew nothing about. And what, for a moment now I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, are we seeing here a situation in which the opposition is engaging in another set of fraudulent documents like the email gate documents? And is it that the opposition is going to, in the future, continue to bring documents like this to malign the character and conduct of people in this Parliament and maybe outside of this Parliament? Because you see, Mr. Speaker, it is very frightening. It's extremely frightening, given the Emailgate situation, and given also what has occurred here today, Mr. Speaker. It's extremely frightening to think that were the opposition to be allowed into the corridors of power, to exercise power as a government, what would be the position of citizens in this country, and would they be subject to being abused through the use of power and set up by having documents like this presented by the government, by the opposition, Mr. Speaker? It's a frightening scenario, Mr. Speaker. A very, very frightening scenario, Mr. Speaker. And it's something that takes me back to the first paragraph of the motion. Whereas it is established fact that the best indication of what could happen in the future is to observe what has happened in the past. And if that is happening in this Parliament while the opposition, God forbid, if they become government, what will happen to the ordinary citizens of this country? Can citizens of this country have any faith and trust in the PNM? They cannot, Mr. Speaker, given what has happened yesterday. They cannot. So when you talk about trusting government, they are not to be trusted for what they have done here today. Brought a purportedly fraudulent document, which has been said by Mr. Ford that he knows nothing about. Mr. Speaker, I think that is terrible. I think that is terrible, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, that very statement at the beginning of this motion, Mr. Speaker, is not going to, I hope it never becomes prophetic at all, Mr. Speaker. Because the ordinary citizen, the small man in this country, and every man and woman in this country, maybe every child in this country, should have mortal fear in their hearts about them ever being in power, Mr. Speaker, as to what they can do. And so, Mr. Speaker, it is my view that they goofed again today. They goofed again today. Discredited by the Minister of Finance this unsigned document, Mr. Speaker. And what they have shown is that they lack integrity, they lack credibility, they lack professionalism in bringing information that cannot in fact be substantiated, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, where is the honor, Mr. Speaker? They talk about honor. Where is the honor, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, let me say that I am happy to defend the Minister of Finance. I am happy to do so, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me also say that the Honourable Prime Minister and all members of the government without exception have the fullest confidence in Mr. Larry Howai as Minister of Finance and Economy, who is the subject of the motion. We are proud of him, Mr. Speaker. We are proud of his professionalism. We are proud of his dedication. We admire his hard work, his sense of national consciousness. He is a credit to this government. He is a credit to this country. And Mr. Speaker, you know what? That is the reason he has become the subject of these attacks, Mr. Speaker. Because he has worked on the platform created by Mr. Dukaran and Mr. Dukaran is Minister of Finance to strengthen the financial situation in this country, to ensure financial stability and economic progress with the vision of the Prime Minister and the government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they speak about the best indicator of what could happen in the future is to observe what has happened in the past. Mr. Speaker, the mover of the motion, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, would recall that in the past, the government of which he was a part always sought to demit office under pressure. Mr. Speaker, what are those facts? What are those facts? He wrote this motion, and I'm responding to that statement in the motion. What are the facts, Mr. Speaker? Whenever the situation in this country got tough, they ran. Not only were they afraid to defend themselves when they have to defend themselves. Mr. Speaker, the mark of leadership is to stand up and defend yourself when you're in the parliament. That's the mark of leadership. Right. Stand up, no matter how tough it is, stand up. The Prime Minister stayed here and defended. The former Attorney General stayed and defended. And today the Minister of Finance is sitting here and defending himself, Mr. Speaker, with honor, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what is their record? And I'm back on the motion. The best indicator of the future, of what could happen in the future, is to observe what has happened in the past. Mr. Speaker, what happened in 1991? There was an election. 16 December 1991, they won the elections. But it didn't last for 5 years. When things got tough, they called an early election and ran again, and they lost in 95. Mr. Speaker, they came back, 2007, election on 5th of November 2007. By 24th of May 2010, less than 5 years, they had gone again, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on 48-1, please. Relevant.
Yeah. I'm following the Minister closely, but if you could connect, I appreciate that. First sentence of the motion. Mr. Speaker, and the point I'm making is I'm showing you that suppose they were to become the government and things get tough again, they'll pick up and run again, Mr. Speaker. Mr.
Speaker, standing order 48-1, irrelevancy.
I'm following the member closely. I've already ruled on that. He's to connect.
It is his pass.
Mr. Speaker, people don't like to hear the truth. They don't like to hear the truth, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Howai has not absconded here today, like others have absconded. He is here today to answer, and we are here to answer along with him, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Howai, despite what they are trying to say about him, he turned around the fortunes of the First Citizens Bank. Today, the member for Digo Martin Northeast is standing there talking about the PNM formed, the FCB and what have you. But Mr. Speaker, why didn't he speak about why Workers' Bank also went into a failure, and the Penny Bank and the Cooperative Bank and so on? Or they were all under the PNM also, Mr. Speaker. Why doesn't he talk about what happened to CLICO when they were in office in 2009 and the regulations were... Why did you talk about that, Mr. Speaker? Because, Mr. Speaker, I'm coming back to what Mr. Howai has done to the First Citizens Bank. Mr. Speaker, let me go back. Because this is the person they're attacking. So when he claims the PNM, let us talk about the people who made it happen and made it turn around. Mr. Howai said here today, the Minister of Finance, that he had other options, that he could have gone to another bank. Mr. Speaker, he was offered a firm job, and I have the letter of the firm job that he was offered. Mr. Speaker, and the letter said here, our offer of employment is subject to receipt by us of 4 satisfactory letters of reference, including one from your most recent employer and what have you. But they say here, I'm pleased to advise that my board has agreed to my extending to you a firm offer of employment in respect of the position of General Manager of Finance, Risk Management and IT. Position that falls within the senior manager, executive management level in the organization structure. And you will carry responsibility for corporate planning, financial control, treasury and investment, in addition to risk management and information technology. Mr. Speaker, and he didn't disclose it, and rightfully so. But he did say that what he would have gotten from his stock options and so on would have been about 40% more than what he got from FCB.
But he chose to stay.
But he chose to stay and to be a nationalist, to be a responsible citizen, to the duty of trying to turn around what was a failed institution, Mr. Speaker. And that kind of commitment, that kind of citizenship, that kind of responsibility to fellow citizens whose money was tied up in those institutions is a rare quality, and we have seen it in Mr. Howai, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Howai became CEO of the new entity in 1995. At that time, the bank was showing a loss of $13.7 million after taxes.
96.
Within 1 year, he moved the bank to a state of profit of $16.5 million after taxes. And when he left the organization in 2011, the profits realized was $718 million after taxes, Mr. Speaker. From a loss of 13.5 to a profit of 718 million after taxes. And what is more interesting, Mr. Speaker, is what he did to the non-performing loan ratio. Mr. Speaker, let's see what he inherited. Because you can tell from what he inherited what is successful about him. And why they are attacking him today is because he's bringing success to this government and this country, and they don't want that. They have the performance of the government is unparalleled. And we took a situation where the country was stuttering in terms of its finances when we took over with all the FICO debitors, and we have brought it back to a state of stability. And the country has returned to growth, Mr. Speaker. Good leadership of the Prime Minister. Good technocrats in the form of Mr. Howai in finance. Mr. Speaker, in 1994, the performing loans amounted to 658.2 million, and the non-performing loans amounted to 508.6 million. And in addition, Taurus, the services limited, had taken over a further $678.6 million in loans. This means, and this is what he inherited, that the ratio of non-performing loans to total loans was approximately 61% when he took over the reins of office as CEO.
I rise on 48.1. I am totally lost. I am looking at the clauses here, and I'm totally lost.
in this debate, sir.
Well, you may be lost, but I am found. I think the member is very relevant, and I do not understand.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while the member for Digo Martin Northeast claims that the PNM did it, that is selfishness. Because, what he has done, he's failing to show any sense of gratitude to the workers of this country, those who also stayed in FCB and worked hard to turn around FCB, Mr. Speaker. But that is the contempt that side has for the people of this country. And the builders of this country, the ones who turned around to save the monies of all those people whose funds were tied up in the Workers' Bank and FCB and the Penny Bank and so on. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Howai led a team which brought the ratio of non-performing loans to total loans down from that 61% to 4.55%. And in that same year, amazing performance, that same year, the non-performing loans of the two large competing banks in Trinidad and Tobago was in the case of Bank A, 3.3% and Bank B, 14.6%. In that same year, the industry average in Trinidad and Tobago was 5.44%, and his average was 4.55% below the industry average, Mr. Speaker, for the percentage of non-performing loans. Mr. Speaker, that is performance. That is what they are attacking. It's not about Mr. Howai. It's about the performance of the government, Mr. Speaker. That is what they are attacking. And every facet of performance, we are excelling. Yes. And the management of the finances is one other area. Mr. Speaker, it is not therefore surprising that in 2003, Mr. Howai was declared and adjudged the most admired CEO in Trinidad and Tobago by Forbes UWI IOB, Mr. Speaker. And that could be found in the Newsday. In the Newsday you can find that. But Mr. Speaker, it is not just UWI IOB that has confidence in Mr. Howai and Mr. Howai's ability, Mr. Speaker. The Guardian newspaper, Mr. Speaker, had an article. Nadleen Singh, the writer, June 28, 2012. Senior economist at Republic Bank Limited, Ronald Ramkisoon, has expressed confidence in the appointing of former CEO of First Citizens Group, Larry Howai, as finance minister. And he was speaking to reporters after the Excellence in Business Forum 2012, Mr. Speaker. He said, though the challenges are going to be great, Ramkisoon said, Howai should stand his ground in terms of good economic policy. I would hope that Mr. Howai will be a stickler for proper economic management, for proper banking rules, and that kind of prudent financial management. And that is what he has stood for. That's what he has stood for, what his profession stands for. He has stood for what his training stands for. But above all, he's a man of principles, and he has stood for what his principles stand for. And that is what they are attacking, Mr. Speaker. That's what they are attacking, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. In fact, on June 26th, Aleem Khan, writing in The Guardian, said, leading business people yesterday expressed hope and confidence in the new Minister of Finance and the Economy, Larry Howai. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, speaking to The Guardian yesterday, I quote, following a seminar hosted by the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange and Ernest Young at the Chamber's head office in Westmoreland, Catherine Kumar said, we know Larry Howai very well. For me, coming from the banking sector, I've worked with him in the past. And even as a chamber, we'd have done a lot with First Citizens. Larry has the required skill set for a ministry like that. He's knowledgeable in the area of finance, very disciplined. I think he understands the need for national development. I think he would be able to bring some balance, Mr. Speaker. These are the top echelons of the people speaking about Mr. Howai, speaking about him. And you bring a motion and you base it upon a discredited document, on signed document, and you hope to to score points on the Minister of Finance. Shame, Mr. Speaker. Shame, Mr. Speaker. I would think that if you bring a case against a person is innocent and proven guilty. But I also think that it is upon you to present the facts that will prove that a man is guilty. And they have failed to provide the facts. And they have brought unsubstantiated documents, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that is shameful. Mr. Speaker, that is dishonoring what this Parliament stands for. I thought that one of the principles of this Parliament was truth, Mr. Speaker. I thought it was truth, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they are the ones who stand up and talk about don't trust this government. But can you trust them when they do things like that, Mr. Speaker? Can you trust them, Mr. Speaker? The country cannot trust them. And I say again, the citizens of this country.
Honourable members, the speaker time of the Honourable Member for Tabakit has expired. Would you like an extension, Honourable Minister? Honourable members, the question is that the speaking time of the Honourable Member for Tabakit be extended by 15 minutes. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. The speaking time of the Honourable Member for Tabakit and the Minister of Works and Infrastructure is extended by 15 minutes. You may continue, Honourable Member.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, is this a case of malicious prosecution? Yes. Mr. Speaker, is this a case of malicious prosecution, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, I say again, I repeat, the citizens of this country should this afternoon, today, stand in mortal fear of those fellows, Because if they could come in the Parliament and attempt to do that, do you know what that forebodes for the citizens of this country, Mr. Speaker? To think that you could have a government in office that's presenting documentation that is going to persecute you.
Consistently so.
Mr. Speaker, when the documents from Emailgate came in here, Mr. Speaker, it's to me a tragedy of great proportion that Emailgate matter has not been settled as yet, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as one of those who are accused in this House, I have a right and I exercise it to call on the Commissioner of Police and to call on the DPP to settle this matter and to settle it before the elections, Mr. Speaker, to settle it now. Because, Mr. Speaker, the outcome of that is going to have a profound impact upon the fortunes of the leader of the opposition, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order 48.1. How is that? That's another motion, as a matter of fact. Mr. Speaker, come on.
Yeah, all right. Member, all right, the member is guided according.
Mr. Speaker, they could give, but they can't take. That's the unfortunate thing, Mr. Speaker. They could give, but they can't take, Mr. Speaker. You see, Mr. Speaker, they goofed today. They goofed again. And they don't want to accept the fact that they have goofed. You see, Mr. Speaker, it was the member for Diego Martin Northeast in its contribution here in the House on the 25th of March 2015 who said, and I quote, "I could not believe that in support of a motion declaring no confidence or purporting or attempting to declare no confidence in the leader of the opposition, that the member for Oropuch East could be so weak."
That matter has not been concluded, and I don't want members to anticipate what is going to be the conclusion. So don't go there, please. Let us not deal with that motion of no confidence until it has been concluded. Let us deal with the matter that is before us. Please.
Sure, Mr. Speaker, but you will recall, Mr. Speaker, and I want to make this point with your permission, that it was the very member for Diego Martin Northeast who said that you are using things that happened 5 years ago before to question the confidence you have in this side.
That's in another debate. That's not in this debate.
Yeah, I wanted to say that in this I wanted to stay in that point. That was in another debate.
Come on.
What we are dealing with now is what the member might have said in this debate. And if it is making reference to an ongoing matter, then we are anticipating that matter. So I would ask you to confine your contribution to what would have been said in the House today. Continue, Honourable Member, please.
Sure, Mr. Speaker. Sure, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I have every confidence, and the members of the government have every confidence in Mr. Larry Howai, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Howai, they spoke about the IPO, their First Citizens IPO. Mr. Speaker, this is a matter that is under investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Mr. Howai has done nothing to prevent an investigation. He has done nothing to prevent an investigation. Mr. Speaker, this government is an open, transparent government. Mr. Speaker, very open, very transparent. And wherever the chips fall out of that investigation, they will fall. Mr. Speaker, this is not a case where a member very familiar, with whom they are very familiar, who bought certain shares in a company, and then was asked to resell the shares, and that was the end of the matter. This is not a government where you cannot find people. They cannot find Calder Hat, they cannot find Garcia, Mr. Speaker, and so on and so forth. Mr. Speaker, this is a very transparent and open government. People stand up and defend themselves, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is serious. So you are coming here and you are attacking the Honourable Minister of Finance, but you're trying to use the dirties of politics to do so, Mr. Speaker. The dirties of politics to do so, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, I could go on and on about what happened in terms of the transformation of FCB under Mr. Howai and his team, Mr. Speaker. So the question is, what is the real objective behind this motion? What is the real objective behind this motion? It's a strategy to attack the government. When the government is being hailed by the population for its achievements, let's face it. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, the first sentence of this motion, you cannot ignore it in terms of looking at this government and what it will do in the future based upon its performance now, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you look carefully at what has happened under that government, Mr. Speaker, they talk about the past as being a predictor of the future, Mr. Speaker. How about the Beach High School? How about that? How about the failure to develop Shagaramas in terms of the whole policy of diversification, Mr. Speaker? How about the failure to develop, critical institutions, Mr. Speaker? What about Las Alturas housing estates, Mr. Speaker? All of these things I can talk about. Because, Mr. Speaker, what we have done in 5 years is the best predictor of what we'll do in the next 5 years. Mr. Speaker, we'll do it. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. And we will do it well. And you will agree with me that we have done well. We didn't employ a firm from Korea that ran away with people's money, you know. And instead of building 9 ECC centers in
Speaker 48-1
years,
motions about the Minister of Finance. It is not a free-for-all.
Mr. Speaker, that's the first part of the motion. The first part of the motion, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Howai is a member of the team, Mr. Speaker, that is in fact delivering in these 5 years, and his contribution is part of what will lead to greater delivery in the next 5 years. So you can't tell me I'm not speaking on the motion. I am speaking on the motion, Mr. Speaker. I am, Mr. Speaker. I am speaking on the motion, Mr. Speaker. They don't want to hear. Because you see, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, they talk about what we have done and what they have done. Mr. Speaker, they want to conveniently forget the world GTL scandal. They want to forget the $3 billion here.
What is World 48-1? What does GTE have?
Right? How will they manage state enterprises if they couldn't manage Petrotrin? What about the gasoline optimization scandal? A $1.5 billion US scandal, Mr. Speaker.
48-1. He has lost. No, but I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker. He has lost his way in this debate.
Okay. Yeah.
48-1.
Yeah. Honorable Minister of Works and Infrastructure, if you could connect those points to the motion itself, I'll appreciate it very much.
I'm not lost my way, Mr. Speaker. I've not. Because, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Howai is part of this government. And these scandals didn't occur under Mr. Howai. Mr. Howai has been able to manage very well, Mr. Speaker, the finances of this country along with the team of the cabinet, Mr. Speaker. So that if they talk about the past as a predictor of the future, the country must know that these things happen under them and can happen under them again if they, by God forbid, they return to office. While in our case, we have managed the finances of this country. We have not sent anybody home. We have not increased taxes. We have not increased VAT, Mr. Speaker. And yet we have preserved jobs in the country, Mr. Speaker. All under the leadership of Mr. Howai. And you are attacking him. So it's not just about this matter about insider trading. This is an attempt to attack the character and impugn the character and conduct of the Minister of Finance. And we have confidence that he is doing a good job and he's a man of principles and ethics, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. They wouldn't talk about all of these things, Mr. Speaker. They wouldn't, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you are talking about a man. You're talking about an individual who has held directorships as Chairman of National Gas, Chairman of National Energy Corporation, Chairman of the E-Business Roundtable, a member of the Commonwealth Business Council. He has been a director at the Unit Trust, the Home Mortgage Bank, the EMA, Trinidad Publishing Company, St. Lucia Electricity Services, and a former president of the Bankers Association, both in the private and public sectors, Mr. Speaker. The principles and ethics. Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I first knew Mr. Larry Howai in the year, I believe it was 1996. I didn't know Mr. Larry Howai before that. 1996, that is when I first came to know Mr. Larry Howai. When I was working at the Institute of Business, and the Institute of Business got a job, I believe it was then to do some consultancy and training at First Citizens Bank. And I remember that training took a period of 59 days, every day. And Mr. Howai, as the CEO of that bank, came every day and spent at least an hour or up to 4 hours with the members of his who were under training, because he tried changing around the culture of the bank, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, in the year 2000, March 20th, 2009, that experience with Mr. Howai remained with me, and I learned quite a lot from him. Even as a person who was doing leadership training and culture change. And I penned a letter to Mr. Howai on March 23rd, 2009, Mr. Speaker. And I said to him then, you have been a positive role model in my life, not only from a professional point of view, but also in terms of holistic development. I said there, you may be surprised that I hold you in such high esteem. You are the most ethical professional I have known in this country. That's my writing. In addition, it is said that still waters run deep. As a person, you are a highly spiritually conscious individual who brings his spirituality to bear upon his way of life, especially in the conduct of his relationships on and off the job. I've been able to see the practice of these values in your style of management, leadership and decision making, and have been inspired by you in this regard. Every opportunity to meet with you and converse has always left me intellectually richer and energized. Mr. Speaker, I have never taken a loan from SCB. Mr. Speaker, in fact, I have never taken a loan from SCB, Mr. Speaker. I owe no one, Mr. Speaker. Even today, I owe no one. Mr. Speaker, I concluded this letter by saying something which I saw today even in Mr. Howai, and it is this. I said this. I've learned many lessons from my interaction with you and my observations of you. In particular, I will take the quality of patience and forbearance which characterizes you. I will take the ability you articulate and demonstrate, which is to be an observer of change that affects one negatively, but to remain unaffected by the change, knowing that it's perhaps karma at work. This too I have seen in you. I will take the ability you show to be in the maddening crowd, but not be trampled by it. as they attempted to do today. I would take your capacity for rational decision-making, looking at all sides of the issue, deliberating and making the even hard decisions. I would take your interest in people first and use it to remind myself of the importance of people as the true resource for my success. Appreciating that seen and unseen, thousands known and unknown, millions of persons are daily contributing to my success. Mr. Speaker, there's more in this letter that I wrote to Mr. Howai. But the PNM's grounds against Howai is that he was head of a state institution without being PNM. That is their grounds. That is their grounds, Mr. Speaker. That is their grounds. Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much for this opportunity, and I stand in full confidence of Mr. Larry Howai.
Before calling on the member for Shogunas West, I recognize first the Honorable Minister of Finance and the Economy, who rose on